Welcome back, Particle People. Today I'd like to talk to you about Magic the Gathering, and not my favorite commander deck, although if you were curious, it's Changelings, it's hilarious, but today I want to talk about specifically Standard. I know, it's a dirty word in the Magic the Gathering community right now, but Standard's actually in a lovely place, and there are a lot of great benefits to it. And in this video, I'd like to explain how you can jump in, how it can make you better at Commander, and if you're learning the game, how it can help teach you that so you can hop into the Commander goodness when we get the new Final Fantasy set, or whatever you're interested in. Now, before we begin, I understand if you're old like me and you remember the meta about 10 years ago, playing Magic the Gathering Standard rules was kind of like picking a popcorn kernel out of your teeth. Both of them could keep you occupied for 5 to 10 minutes, and neither of them were fun, I understand. But we've had such good sets recently, from Bloomburrow to Duskmourn. Don't talk about Aether Drift, it's garbage, but Foundations, awesome sets that play fantastically in Standard and allow us to get right to the jank. So let's talk about the first benefit of playing Magic the Gathering, especially in Standard format, and for this video's purposes, we're gonna say in the arena, online for free. You don't have to pay to do this. Not sponsored, by the way. I just really think this is a good tool to learn Magic if you're new, or to play feverishly if you're addicted like I am. So the first benefit is the fact that you get to play for absolutely free. The barrier to entry is 0. Yes, you won't get to have all the cards for free, but you do not need to spend money, and you can build a collection over time. It may not be the quickest build, but you get to play Magic for absolutely freezies. Not to mention, it's going to find you opponents in less than a minute. Like, that's so quick. Have you ever tried to play Commander and you can't just find that fourth person? You really want to have a 4-pod because your deck just doesn't fire properly with only 3 people? Maybe you haven't yet, but that's a situation that I don't like. And that's another benefit, because if you want to play a quick game of Magic but you don't have time to sit down with 4 people, as Jimmy over there in the corner takes a 30-minute solitaire turn, you can play a Standard game, and typically they're over in just a few minutes. Yeah, I will typically play a Standard game with the other people who have gotten eliminated in a larger Commander game in between Commander games. It is a really good supplemental game to have. But what if you're watching this and you don't know how to play Commander, but you want to get in, especially now that you've seen that your favorite Final Fantasy characters that I can't name a single one of are joining the Magic the Gathering universe? Let me tell you what, if you play Magic the Gathering Arena, they will give you decks to play with, and they are not amazing. I'm not going to lie to you. They're not going to compete with my amazing deck seen on screen. It's not that great, but I made it myself and I love it. But they will give you functional decks with a very clear win condition, which if you are new to Magic and trying to get into Commander, but you're a little bit intimidated by a larger group size and you're not quite sure about how turn orders or mana or any of that stuff works yet, playing on the Arena will let you learn these things for free 99. Unlike a very unscrupulous individual correcting your every move, this game will just simply not let you do things you can't with your cards. Soon enough, you'll have the idea of how drawing, untapping, and upkeeping works, and you'll get ideas for what maybe you want to throw into your Commander deck, because the meta is in such a healthy place. You're going to see so many different types of decks. Hell, even when I was recording this to get some footage into the background, I was playing against a deck that has a scroll card that I need to throw into my Mimics deck, just because I think it'd be really, really funny. It could probably kill the whole table. But I think the biggest advantage of playing in Standard is that you get to your deck's jank so much more quickly. Playing in Standard is like a cage match between you and one other individual. Both of you are going to be hell-bent on responding to the board each and every turn. Commander can often have gaps in action, especially if your starting hand did not include a Soul Ring, where you're still trying to ramp up and see what the other people are doing. You may sit there for 5 to 10 minutes before getting another turn, but not in Standard. You will have your turn back in about 30 seconds, and if you don't have your turn back, you're still being asked to respond to the board state. And unlike Commander, it's not a singleton format. You can have up to 4 copies of every given card in your deck, meaning that you can go ahead and put those combo pieces together with much less stress and much fewer tutors. And you might be asking, well, how does this make me better at Commander? It's because Commander is just a big Standard on a singleton format. Trust me, if you see something like I did right here with an Aberrant Oculus, now I'm thinking about how I have to get that into a Commander deck ASAP, because that would crush when multiple people take multiple turns. To take all of the ideas from Standard and see if you can extrapolate them over to a singleton format, and sometimes that's going to be really hard to do, but it will give you the ideas on how to play these decks and what combos work really well with each other. Standard boils down the base mechanics of your deck's win condition in a very understandable and lucid way, where Commander can be a little bit more nebulous. Once you build your first Commander deck or buy your first precon, you may not be entirely sure on how to play it for the first several games. But your Standard decks will not have that much variety, and so your combos will be a lot easier to enable, and the decks will be a lot more precise and streamlined. Essentially, it will be easier for you to pick up what the cards do in the general win con, and then you can apply that to your decks in the future if you're ever going to make them, versus sitting down and reading every single Commander card you have. Sometimes when you play Commander, you unfortunately just do not get your combo pieces and you get stomped out. It may make the deck feel worse than it actually really is. And if you don't have time for another 30-minute game, it may just be that way in your opinion for a very long time. A good example of this is the first time I played a Fallout Commander Precon, more specifically the Mothman one. I really thought the deck was underpowered and bad because my draws were just so terrible and I wasn't really familiar with the mechanics I was using. I stopped playing that deck for quite a long time because I was frustrated with it, but out of a whim, after losing 3 games in a row, I decided to pull out that deck and I stomped. What I'm trying to say is getting standard games under your belt will help you understand how to keep the momentum in your favor when you go to Commander. It may help you make better decisions in the future as well as understand the win conditions of a deck. If you're unfamiliar with a card, chances are you're going to either under or overvalue it, and until you get to play with a bunch of cards to get a general idea of how they feel, you may be left in the dark. So without further ado, I do want to jump into a bit of an example of this idea of how you can become better at Commander and decide what decks to build in the future by playing more Standard. So the deck that I'm showing you on screen now is the one that's been on the back this whole time. This is what I call Dread Dead Redemption. I named the deck this way, and if somebody doesn't comment that the name's great, well, I'm gonna cry myself to sleep tonight. And yes, to me, this deck is going to be Commander coded. I will be working on making a Commander similar, equivalent deck of this because of how much I love the mechanics and the way it plays. When you're making a deck, whether it be in Standard or Commander, you really want to ask yourself, what is my win condition? And with this particular deck, I decided I wanted a bunch of win conditions. And while you are newer, I would recommend that you keep fewer win conditions that are more concise, but this one's going to kind of do a bunch of things at once, and let me explain. So my first win condition for this deck is an OTK that I saw on Shuffle Up and Play. Thank you for the idea, I love it so much. This OTK works by having the Bloodthirsty Conqueror and the Starscape Cleric activate off of each other over and over until your opponent is dead, because one reads whenever you gain life, your opponent loses 1 life, and the other one reads whenever your opponent loses a life, you gain a life. They fire indefinitely. If you do it right, it looks something like on the screen now, and I understand this is probably a very frustrating way for people to lose, but unfortunately, I gotta get them wins. Now, with such an obvious one-turn kill, how am I gonna get it onto the board is what I had asked myself, and I figured because of how much I love the Duskmourn set and Manifest Dread, I was gonna try to cheese them onto the board by using that garbage. In case you don't know, if you use a Manifest Dread card, you get to look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put one of them into your graveyard, and one face down as a 2/2 creature. If it's a creature card underneath, you can pay its mana cost later to reveal it for its actual creature, but what's important to remember here is a manifested creature is still the creature underneath, and you can reveal it by using shady tactics, such as Not Dead After All. When you use Not Dead After All on a manifested creature, when it dies, it comes back as the creature that was underneath, which is why we had to add a little bit of extra spice, because yes, we do want the one-turn kill combo piece, but what we also want are big bads that force surrenders. And that's why we have Vel'Gavoth in this deck, because if you manifest him properly in one way or the other and you get him turned face up, whether it be with Not Dead After All or with the active ability of a Hauntwood's Shrieker, you are going to make somebody tilted so far and so fast that they are going to immediately scoop. So that means we can add putting a gigantic demon onto the board as our second win condition, and believe it or not, this happens fairly frequently. But because of the Manifest Dread package I have in here, my other win condition is just going incredibly wide. If I get enough Manifest Dread things in my hand all at once, I will flood the board with 2/2 manifestations and try to run you down. Another important detail I left out earlier about manifestations is that you can reveal them at any time for their mana cost, which leads me to my favorite win condition known as the Sneak Attack. I will declare attacks with 2/2 manifestations, maybe 2, maybe 3, who knows, and then you're going to declare blockers, and just as you've declared the wrong blockers, I will pay the mana cost to go through and swing at your face for a big number. And while I don't really consider it a win condition, I do have an Unstoppable Slasher in this deck, which can cut the opponent's health in half if it makes contact with them, but it's also even better as a removal magnet, because people will try to get this thing off the board for days, and I love it. That pretty much sums up the ways I try to win here. There's also Altanach the Thrice Called, and as well as Say Its Name to try to mill some cards, get some garbage into my graveyard, and some graveyard recursion, but none of that stuff is super important. What is important is that it's my favorite deck to play in Standard, and I'm trying to translate these mechanics into a Commander deck, because I understand how they work and what I want the win condition to be. I really do think playing Standard with smaller sample sizes will allow you to have a lot of ideas like this, and give you a much more comprehensive guide to making your own Commander decks, or you could always just go to like EDH Rec and copy decks there too, but I really do like this approach of starting in Standard and developing an idea all the way to a 100-card singleton. My perspective, I have the groundwork of what I want a deck to do in Commander. I already have a smaller, more agile version for Standard, and now I just need to think about how I can interpret it. One of the issues I'm going to have to go through is the fact that, well, I can't use Altanach here, because you can't have Say Its Name, period, in a Commander deck, because you can't get 3 copies of it, really. And deciding the Commander is equally difficult, because with the limited amount of specifically manifest Manifest Dread cards. I know there's other Manifest cards, but I want it to be themed. How do I pick a commander? I'm going to need it to be multicolored because I want to put in the blue Manifest as well as the red Manifest cards too when I get there. So my mana base is going to have to be equally diverse, something that's going to be a huge departure from what I'm able to play here in Standard. But the good news is I've already figured out a huge amount of my questions just by playing with my smaller sample size, and now I get to extrapolate that onwards. And I understand my approach for building a commander deck may be an outlier for many, but if you don't want to build commander decks this way, and if you don't want to think about it that way, that's perfectly fine too. Just playing Standard to get the base mechanics down if you're new, or to do a brush up if you've been away for a while, is still a great idea. And maybe just consider playing Standard by itself because it's a really fun game mode, and I would always love to play more of this in real life. But what do you think? Am I just a silly old man screaming at clowns completely off my rocker, or do you think that I have some good points here? Anything you have to say, please let me know down in the comments. As always, this has been Sand for Days. I'm Course, and I get everywhere. Bye-bye now.